والله ای پروردگار یاران را کام کار کن و به عبودیتت همدم و دمساز فرما قلوب را نورانی فرما و وجوه را رحمانی کن تا بنیان محبت و مهربانی در عالم انسانی تأسیس گردد و نوع بشر به یکدیگر مفتون و مهر پرور گردد. شرق دست در آغوش غرب نماید، فرهنگ بیدرنگ سبیل محبت پوید. ترک تاجیک را همدم داند و هماغوش و مهربان شمرد، کل با هم در نهایت الفت و یگانگی معاشرت و مصاحبت نمایند. بیگانگی نماند، ذکر اغیار نشود و همدیگر را آشنا و یاور و غمگسار گردند. ای پروردگار این شب تار را روز روشن فرما و این بغض و عداوت بین ملل را به انس و محبت مبدل کن تا عالم آفرینش آسایش یابد و جهان پرغرور از عالم الهی نصیب موفور جوید. تویی مقتدر و توانا و تویی بخشنده و درخشنده و بینا. این
Marianne, thank you so much. Whenever you're ready, please. Thank you.
I have the sign on my screen that says this meeting is being recorded. Should I hit continue?
Oh, sure, please.
I'd never do anything for fear it's going to blow up in my face or disconnect me. Thank you, Neda, for this, my final contribution to your studies of some answered questions. As there are 5 chapters to be covered in this session, you will be happy to hear that my particular part of chapter 74 on good and evil will only last about 8 minutes long. And then John has the Herculean task of taking up the rest of the time to convey knowledge of the other 4 chosen chapters. Like so much of the Baha'i writings, I found these 2 pages on good and evil intriguing and very thought-provoking. One would have expected that details of the subject would mention human behavior and misbehavior, goodness versus humanity's sins and crimes, but nay. Abdu'l-Baha's first statement is that the subject of good and evil is difficult, stressing difficult indeed. I think that the title of this chapter in the previous editions, perhaps the original publication, might have been better for directing our thinking. That old title for chapter 74 was The Non-Existence of Evil. We all know that the sacred writings speak of good deeds and evil deeds. Evil deeds are recognized and we all know of their appearances. But in the 2 pages of chapter 74, neither good or evil deeds actions are enumerated. Because, as Abdu'l-Baha says, the subject of good and evil is difficult indeed, and I must admit, because my notes look like they lack a reasonable understanding of the 2 pages, I'm going to state up front a basic premise that Abdu'l-Baha seems to want us to understand. That premise is that good is a positive thing and exists. After all, you take goodness into the next world. Evil is only the absence of good, and there are no traces of it in the eternal world. Abdu'l-Baha likens this to darkness merely being the absence of light. It is the second sentence of chapter 74 that shows the wisdom of Abdu'l-Baha and what we have to keep in mind when studying the 2 pages. Know thou that created things are of 2 kinds, material and spiritual, sensible and intelligible. It appears to me that Abdu'l-Baha is concentrating for us God's creation and not man's behavior. All created things are of 2 kinds. There is a deeper understanding of good and evil when viewed only in the light of God the Creator and his creation. Abdu'l-Baha's limited commentary puts on our shoulders the responsibility of looking into the subject with new eyes. You will see that with the material and the spiritual, he firmly states that both are good. No ifs, ours, or buts. Both are good, material and spiritual things. But they are the things that God created. In reading and rereading the 2 pages, I found myself wanting to make 2 columns of Abdu'l-Baha's words. One, of course, for material and the other on the spiritual. So I did. On the material side, I put down, it's, as Abdu'l-Baha says, sensible. The 5 senses deal with the outward things. The eyes see, the ears hear, etc. Blindness, Abdu'l-Baha says, is the absence of sight. Deafness, the absence of hearing. The spiritual, intellectual side is longer. Abdu'l-Baha explains that no senses are used, things are perceived by the mind, and that the mind has no outward existence. It's non-material. The mind perceives virtues and attributes which are praiseworthy and good. Evil is the absence of virtues and attributes in themselves. They do not exist. There is guidance, remembrance, understanding, knowledge. Their absence is ignorance, forgetfulness. They do not last. They do not exist. Continuing on with Abdu'l-Baha's words and repeating the premise above in respect of God's creation and good and evil, he explains that what is good in man is praiseworthy and, might we understand, lasting on a permanent level spiritually. Evil, the absence of good, is in comparison non-existence. In this respect, I am reminded of a talk given at the World Center by one of the original members of the Universal House of Justice, Ali Nachavani. Among the quotes in that talk, Mr. Nachavani mentioned one on good deeds. Here are his words. Abdu'l-Baha said, "The good deeds of the righteous are the sins of the near ones." Now, let's think about this for a moment, says Mr. Nachavani. The righteous here, I think, refers to the rank and file of the believers. What is good for the rank and file is not necessarily good for those who enjoy near access unto him, the near ones. What is good for X is not good enough for Y. Excuse me. What's the reason? The reason is that this Mr. Y or Miss Y or Mrs. Y has a higher rank and is enjoying nearer access to God. So what is good for one is not good for the other. In fact, it is not only not good enough, it is a shortcoming. It is a sin. He says, the good deeds of the righteous are the sins of the near ones. What I seem to be trying to do in connecting our subject with this above Ali Nachavani story is one of comparison. Look into the sacred writings and you will read, for example, Baha'u'llah bidding mankind to change evil behavior into good behavior. He recognizes that there are evil actions. And Abdu'l-Baha refers to evil in other chapters of some answered questions, such as this pretty pertinent one to this chapter. This quote appears in Some Answered Questions on page 214. Capacity is of two kinds, natural capacity and acquired capacity. The first, which is the creation of God, is pure good. In the creation of God, there is no evil, but the acquired capacity has become the cause of the appearance of evil. The creation of God is purely good. Goodly acts, which require the attributes of God, are the spiritual things required of the soul drawing near unto the divine creator. They are permanent, lasting. Evil in comparison is not a part of the eternal spiritual worlds of God. Therefore, says Abdu'l-Baha, they are non-existent. The only statement that can be made in concluding this presentation is repeating Abdu'l-Baha's opening sentence. To explain the truth of this matter is difficult indeed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marianne. Before we move on to John Kolstoe for chapter 75 through 77, does anyone have any questions for Marianne on this chapter 74? If you do, please use the raise your hand feature, or you can save your questions for the very end. Okay, John Kolstoe, chapter 75 through 77. Whenever you're
going to take you up on your offer and throw this in Marianne's lap. if someone pulls out a gun and wants to rob me with that gun, that I consider something that's evil. And it is not purely non-existent at that moment. It's very real, very tangible. So how can it be, how can it not be if it's so threatening to me? I have a thought on it, partly related to what Marianne brought out from another part of that. And that is the fact that what Abdu'l-Baha is talking about here is in the original or the ideational phase of things. That is the things that led up to that gun being pointed at me. It was a long chain of events, I'm sure. And the start of it was simply lack of education, as Abdu'l-Baha says. And so there, it was non-existent at that point. However, once, and this is where I want Marianne to jump on me, once it is present in the physical world, it takes on a very real existence. Comment, Marianne?
Please unmute yourself, Marianne.
Okay, that's why I added in the fact that the sacred writings do say that there are evil acts. What I had to think about was the name of the chapter. The chapter was Good and Evil. It wasn't Good and Evil Deeds. That's why I think the old title was more appropriate to what Abdu'l-Baha wanted to convey. And that old one I told you was the non-existence of evil. So it's like saying that the world is a mirage, and the world is absolutely, totally material. But as God created it, what I understand, as God created it, Abdu'l-Baha is saying it's all good. That the creation, be it material or spiritual, is all good. It's what we do to it that makes it bad. But he says in comparison, it is non-existence because it cannot last. Now, I can say these words because I'm repeating what Abdu'l-Baha said. But as he said, it's difficult to understand. It's like being on two planes and trying to put them together for some logic. So I was very specific in just trying to understand what he said. He says that evil is non-existent. He doesn't say evil deeds aren't committed, because when we die, we're told that we will know all those shortcomings, sins, cruel things we did. I believe I told you that Rahia Khanum said that Shoghi Effendi said when Hitler died, he went straight to hell and he's still there. Now, he was judged by all those evil deeds, but the evil deeds are not in the next world. So as far as Abdu'l-Baha talking about the realities being good and evil, the good goes on and the evil ceases to exist. I think it's one of, I can understand good and evil deeds, but his explanation of good and evil on this higher level is not the easiest thing to grasp. And we should go on to your chapter now, John.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is still something which would generate a lot of discussion. Shakespeare said the opposite in Julius Caesar. The good men do, the evil men do continues on. The good is interred with their bones. That was his appraisal.
He
You're
was
mute.
just the opposite of Abdu'l-Baha.
That's true. That's true.
I'm
But it-
getting a message that says my system is erratic. So if you lose me, it's not my fault.
Okay. But thank you very much, Marianne, for
Thank you for asking, John.
your insightful observations. And since this is a very difficult matter, we're not going to conclude it tonight, no matter what we do. But let's go on to two kinds of torment. And Netta, this is a very short chapter. Maybe we should have someone read it in its full.
Okay.
And maybe you could put it up on the screen and have someone read it.
Yeah, just give me a moment and I'm going to ask Alicia to do that. One moment, please.
Good old Alicia.
We've had some thunderstorms here, and that may be why I'm getting this message that my system is a little erratic.
Well, I'll start reading it since there's a little delay here. Know that there are two kinds of torment. So, oh, there we go. Alicia, you want to read?
Yes, sir. The justice and mercy of God. Know that justice consists in rendering to each his due.
You're a chapter ahead. We're on 75. Very short one. You went past it. You went past it. You missed it. Down further. Scroll down. There we go.
Two kinds of torment. Know that there are two kinds of torment, subtle and palpable. For example, ignorance is itself a torment, but it is a subtle torment. Indifference to God is itself a torment. Falsehood is itself a torment. Iniquity and treachery are torments. Indeed, all the human imperfections are torments, but they are subtle torments. A person endowed with a conscience will certainly prefer to be killed rather than to sin, and to have his tongue cut out rather than to slander and lie. The other kind of torment is palpable and consists in physical punishments such as imprisonment, beating, expulsion, and banishment. But for the people of God, to be veiled from him is still more grievous than all these torments.
Okay. Thank you very much. You're going to have to excuse me for just a minute. I have a little process to take care of here before I can continue. You fill out the rest. Yeah, next Monday.
And then your room, the sheets, everything's clean.
Okay,
Just,
great.
I don't know if you.
Okay, we're going to start in just a few minutes. Thank you all for your patience.
Oh, I was quiet. Thank you. Um, I don't have many comments on it, except it's pretty self-evident. For example, ignorance itself is a torment, but it's a subtle torment. Indifference to God is a torment. Falsehood. Okay, how can these things be torments? You think it's a torment is a response to something that's been done. But anyway, ignorance, let me put it this way. All the trouble we get ourselves into because of ignorance is the torment that comes from ignorance. Further on, that's a pretty obvious thing, but the last paragraph is worth reading here. The other kind of torment is palpable and consists in physical punishments, such as imprisonment, beating, expulsions, and banishment. But for the people of God, to be veiled from Him is still more grievous than all these torments. So in other words, we get into another realm, not only of two divisions, but of gradations. Being beat is a torment, no question about it. But then it says very clearly that being denied access to God is the greater torment. And so I think there have been times when I have desperately wanted to do something on a Baha'i nature, but I've been prevented from doing it for various reasons. And it was an enormous torment. I wanted to attend the London Congress in 1963, but I was teaching school at the time and couldn't get away. And it was a great, great torment. As partly as a result, I went into business of my own, so I wouldn't have to be, my time would not have to be dictated by others. I had a freedom of time of action because I didn't want to repeat of that torment of not being able to attend the London Congress. Well, I was able to attend the New York Congress. I was also able to attend 5 international conventions for the election of the House of Justice. I would not have been able to do those things had I stayed in education. And so there was a palpable torment as far as I was concerned, and partially responsible for my change in careers. Anyone else have any comments on this? If not, we go on to 676. This is a little longer, but I think we can still pull up a screen and someone could read it. You had to go, okay, great. Alicia, you're going to start reading, please.
Yes, sir. The justice and mercy of God. Know that justice consists in rendering to each his due. For example, when a workman labors from morning till evening, justice requires that he be paid his wage, but bounty consists in rewarding him even when he has done no work and expended no effort. So when you give alms to a poor man who has made no effort and done nothing for your benefit to deserve it, this is bounty. Thus Christ besought forgiveness for those responsible for his death. This is called bounty. Now the question of the excellence or baseness of things is determined either by reason or by religious law. Some believe that it is based on religious law. Such is the case with the Jews, who believe that all the commandments of the Torah are binding and that they are matters of religious law rather than of reason. Thus they say that one of the commandments of the Torah is that meat and butter cannot be eaten together, for this is trifa, and trifa in Hebrew means unclean, while kosher means clean. They say is a question of religious law and not of reason. But the divine philosophers hold that the excellence or baseness of things depends on both reason and religious law. Thus, the prohibitions made on murder, theft, treachery, falsehood, hypocrisy, and iniquity are based on reason. Every rational mind can grasp that these are all vile and reprehensible. For if you merely prick a man with a thorn, he will cry out in pain. How well must he realize then that murder, according to reason, is vile and reprehensible? And were he to commit such a crime, he would be held accountable for it, whether the prophetic message had reached him or not, for reason itself grasps the reprehensible character of this deed. Thus, when a person commits such base actions, he will assuredly be held to account. But if the prophetic injunctions have not reached a place and the people fail as a result to act in conformity with the divine teachings, then they are not held accountable according to the laws of religion. For instance, Christ enjoined that cruelty should be met with kindness. If a person remains unaware of this injunction and acts according to the promptings of nature, that is, if he returns injury for injury, then he is not held accountable according to the laws of religion, for this divine injunction has not been conveyed to him. Although such a person is not deserving of divine bounty and favor, God will nevertheless deal with him in his mercy and grant him forgiveness. Now vengeance is reprehensible even according to reason, for it is of no benefit to the avenger. If a man strikes another, and the victim chooses to exact revenge by returning the blow, what advantage will he gain? Will this be a balm to his wound, or a remedy for his pain? No, God forbid. In truth, the two actions are the same. Both are injuries. The only difference is that one preceded the other. Therefore, if the victim forgives, or better still, if he acts in the opposite manner, this is praiseworthy. As for the body politic, it punishes the aggressor, but not to exact revenge. The purpose of this punishment, rather, is to deter and dissuade, and to oppose iniquity and aggression, so as to prevent others from extending their hand likewise in oppression. But if the victim chooses to forgive and to show instead the greatest mercy, this is most approved in the sight of God.
Okay, this is a fascinating item, and there's all sorts of thoughts that jump into mind. Basically, it's talking about three kinds of I don't want to say laws, I want to say admonitions that are all real. The first, of course, that talked about is the religious laws that are laid down, and the Jews are more specific on many of the religious laws the uh, than the Protestants are, or the Christians are. It's interesting. The 12 Commandments were the most crucial of the laws under the Torah for which the death penalty could be accepted. And if you take a look at the sixth commandment on adultery, if that were extended today, we wouldn't have to worry about a world overpopulation, because there'd be a whale of a lot of death penalties exacted for that. But the second then is basically the municipal laws. In every country, state, and city, there are laws that people are to follow for a variety of reasons, and these are material laws, but they are based on the body politic, and so one comes from the religious institutions, and the other one comes from the political institutions that abide. And the third set, and these are all overlapping, is the good sense that God gave us to begin with. In other words, I'm not sure if I would need a law to not kill someone else. Just the thought of it is reprehensible to me, but that's just my reason. But it is a third of the three bases of admonitions or injunctions that are overlapping. This is today something that strikes me stands in contrast to chapter 5 or paragraphs 5 and 6. You watch TV and you see all sorts of people who are demonstrating about this or that or the other thing. And how often have you heard, particularly when someone is killed, I just want justice. I just want justice. No, they want retribution. And that's exactly the opposite of what's said here in these final two paragraphs, that retribution is not acceptable. Forgiveness is the key thing. Now, the fact of the matter is that retribution, as it states here, what good does it do the individual to get the retribution? But forgiveness sweeps away the dust of sins so that we can see more clearly. In fact, in the what was it I'm trying to think of? And the fire tablet, next to the last comments there, talks about forgiveness as being the mechanism to clear away the debris that keeps us from seeing clearly into the renewed path. And I think far too little is said about the power of forgiveness. The power, I like the Indian saying that man who harbors a grudge or does not forgive has been shot 1,000 times with a single arrow. In other words, he doesn't get rid of the pain because he wants revenge. The only way he can get rid of the pain is by true forgiveness. And forgiveness is the most underrated tool for peace in the world that we have. That's my personal opinion, obviously. As for the body politic, it punishes the aggressor, but not to exact revenge. And this distinction is very clear. The body politic must protect all the people, and it does this by punishing those who violated the laws. Now, there gets to be another item, and that has to do with how they go about punishing those that are guilty of various crimes and sins. The American recidivism rate is terrible. It's up 60–70%, something like that. In the Nordic countries, Germany, Norway, Finland, Denmark and Sweden, they have a much different way of treating criminals. They don't dehumanize them. They treat them as human beings and are being given another opportunity within their creole. And this is almost a literal example of following Abdul Baha's admonition, or that ignorance is the absence, is non-existence, it's just the absence of knowledge. And so they're treating these individuals as being flawed in that they are lacking something. So they're given educational opportunities that they never had before. And they're treated as human beings. In fact, I saw a video, a take on one time where a murderer had his own private room with his key to get into his own private room, which is so much different. And the early release of prisoners is higher there than it is in the United States, where they serve out your full term. But and the recidivism rate in most of those countries is in the 30%, 20 and 30%, rather than ours, which is 16, 70%. And so here we have a situation where even with when one is guilty of the crime, retribution does not have to be a painful process. It can be a restorative process if it's approached properly. Any other comments on 76?
There is a chat, and I am going to read it because I actually also have a response for it, but I'd like to have you, John. This is what it says. It says, I'm a Christian. This is one of our participants. I'm a Christian, for those that don't know. What is the Baha'i response to an eternal hell, torment in the Bible? One popular passage I know is the following. Then he will say to those on his left, depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. Then they will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life. And Trevor references Matthew's chapter 25, verse 41 and 46.
My initial thought is that that was designed to scare the hell out of people.
Yeah, well, in the Baha'i teachings, you know, we don't believe that there is that someone will burn in hell forever, that there is no physical suffering in a spiritual world. This is why it's so important when we always say to offer prayers for those who have passed on, because we're not only praying for them, but if we know them personally, we're praying for them so that God will forgive them of any of the wrongdoings and of the shortcomings that they have endured. But in Baha'i books, it always explains that when you do go into the next world, it is a cause of you becoming nearer to God. So it's not the way you've quoted from Matthew's that, you know, there's eternal hell and that you're away from God. So that's, yeah, if anybody else has any comments, and hopefully that helped. I don't know.
That's very insightful, Neil.
Oh, Bijan, actually, please. Thank you, John.
Anyone else?
Okay. I just want to add to what Neda Khanum just said, that she said it beautifully. And also in the Matthew, it does talk about hell being far away. And that's what in Baha'i faith also refers to, being far away from the beloved. So you don't get that sweetness of being and the nearness to God or to his manifestation of the God, or the primal point, basically. That's what it, I think they both say the same thing, but it's how we take it is differently as human beings. But I want to make a comment on that paragraph 4 and 5, or 5 and 6, that John explained to us, which I want to also thank you for that, that it talks about the religious prophetic junctions that if they have not reached human beings, then God forgives you. And it says that God will nevertheless deal with him in his mercy and grant him forgiveness. But in the for the body politics, which is the municipal laws, if you don't know the law and you break it, you will get punished, regardless if you know it or you don't know it. Versus in the religious law, if you don't know it, if it hasn't reached you, God forgives you. And I found that very interesting.
Yeah, there are many ways to look at this, and that's one very valid one. I also take a look at what Marianne Gorski was talking about it with chapter 74, and that is the fact that the non-existence of evil, when applying this to a person when he dies, the evil person, all that non-existence disappears, so he has nothing to take with him into the next world, whereas someone who is following the Baha'i law or the laws of God as set down has a bag full of rewards that he's taking with him to the next world. And the poor guy, the evil one, has nothing left because evil is nothing. That may be a little subtle, I don't know. Any other thoughts or comments?
I just want to go back, if you don't mind, to Trevor, because I never like to say something without also adding and providing a source. So I would like to encourage the friends to read Gleanings from Writings of Baha'u'llah, pages 67 to 68. And what Baha'u'llah has written, it's absolutely lovely about heaven and a response to Trevor. So pages 67 to 68. Afsaneh, we do have Afsaneh, John. Afsaneh, please.
You have the text available to you there, Neda, so you can share it?
I can make it available, yeah. Let me go grab my book. Yeah, while Afsaneh is asking her question.
Okay.
Thank you, Neda. I have a question about the title of this chapter is Justice, Mercy and Justice. So if God forgives if an evildoer, God will have mercy on him. But what about justice? What about the victims? Is it where, and then also God forgives when the criminal or somebody who did an evil deed, do they have to repent first and ask for forgiveness, or this mercy is just automatic?
Anyone else care to tackle that one first? Well, here's my thought on that. And that is that God would prefer the individual who takes the initiative to ask for forgiveness. So his mercy may eventually be there to help out the poor sinner. But if someone takes the initiative to do the right thing, particularly to compensate for what was done, I would think that would be more meritorious, and hence there would be a higher reward. I don't know how this reward system works.
Thank you. Thank you, John.
Anyone else on there?
And let me just read this because I found it here. So again, page 67. In the kingdoms of earth and heaven, there must needs be manifested a being, in essence, who shall act as a manifestation and vehicle for the transmission of the grace of the divinity itself, the sovereign Lord of all. Through the teachings of this day star of truth, every man will advance and develop until he attaineth the station at which he can manifest all the potential forces with which his inmost true self hath been endowed. It is for this very purpose that in every age and dispensation, the prophets of God and his chosen ones have appeared amongst men and have evinced such power as is born of God and such might as only the eternal can reveal.
Wow. That was great. Thank you very much. Very, very appropriate here too.
Did
I
you
wanna go
did
back-
you say that was Gleanings?
Yeah, Gleanings, page 67, it's the very bottom paragraph, and then on 68, it's the very top paragraph. And John, we also have Kathleen, please, before you continue with the last chapter.
Go ahead. Kathleen?
Sometimes I think that the mercy of God, he's all knowable, God's all knowable. And so you have an individual, as you said before, that does evil, an evil deed. Perhaps it's because he's not educated, that maybe the mercy of God depends on understanding why that person did that evil deed. Is it something that he was taught in his childhood, his surroundings? That's all he was exposed to. I mean, I just think that sometimes things happen because those same things happen to them and they don't know how to break that cycle.
That fits in with something that just came up on the chat, and that is, what about the soul of a murderer? And that can be a very complex thing because, well, Gahil Gibran made the observation that the murdered man must share the guilt with the murderer. In other words, sometimes people have done something so reprehensible that it causes somebody else to want to murder them, in which case there has to be shared guilt, and that according to Gahil Gibran. You also have, I don't want to say justifiable murder, but certainly understandable murder, where, well, particularly in domestic affairs, where one spouse is so upset by the infidelity of the other spouse that takes his life. In other words, I'm not saying that that's all right or anything of the sort, but just that I can see a person being driven so far in terms of his own value systems to take this form of revenge or this form of retribution for an individual, even though, according to Chapter 76, it's not the right of the individual to render retribution. That's the state's job, not the individual's job. But what I'm saying is that you can't just dismiss murder as a single thing and everybody's going to get treated by the same. I'm sure that God looks into all the factors that are involved, what drove the person to the murder in the first place.
Yeah, that's what I think too. Thank you.
So
Glad
is,
to share an opinion.
so is it fair to say that if the municipal law punishes that evildoer, then God will take mercy on him and forgive him? What if somebody who never gets justice by law, by any of the other systems?
I can only answer that by giving an example of the negative. And that is Abdul Baha is talking about a person who, a murderer, when he was asked a question, would a murderer be punished in the next world for the murder? And his answer was, if he's already received adequate punishment in this world, he would not be punished in the next world. That'd be double jeopardy, and that would not be fair. And so the guy who's, quote, gotten by with it in this world has a very interesting surprise awaiting for him when he gets into the next world. Whereas the person who served his time in this world has served his time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Question was raised about the death penalty for murder, arson, and adultery. No, what was the third one in there? But for arson and murder, as it appears in the Kitab al-Aqdas, and the notes and questions at the end of the Kitab al-Aqdas, there's an explanation of that, which is quite adequate. And that is that the House of Justice has the absolute right to reduce the punishment to whatever. Okay, anyone else have anything?
Yeah, I think we should move on, John.
All right. The punishment of criminals. Well, I can tell you one thing, that the American tradition that started not too long ago of lock them up and throw away the keys has not answered very much. This is another one of those chapters that begins with a question. Should a criminal be punished, or should he be forgiven for his crime and his crime overlooked? Answer. There are two kinds of I'm just amused by how often Abdul Baha starts about there are two kinds of this, there are two types of this, two ways to look at this. And then he gives a half a dozen subtitles. There are two kinds of retributive action. One is revenge and retaliation, and the other punishment and requital. The individual has no right to seek revenge, but the body politic has the right to punish the criminal. This is what I was saying earlier, that in many of the protest scenes, I just want justice. I just want justice. What they really are asking for is retribution. And they're very vociferous in their demand for that. And it's not right. In the third paragraph, the body politic, however, must punish the oppressor, the murderer, and the assailtant, to dissuade and deter others from committing similar crimes. Now, this is a difficult thing to measure, but if you were to forgive every wrongdoer for his wrongdoing, then he would go ahead happily continuing in his wrongdoing. And it's up to the state or up to the government to curtail that. So this punishment is not exactly the same as public hanging or the boards used in the days of the early days of this country, with the locks, where people were held in locks so they could be ridiculed. Not exactly the same of that, the intents of that, but it's the same idea. So point out the fact that it doesn't pay to do whatever it was that the crime was taken for. Now, this is a very clear distinction too. When the state does this, it is not retribution. When the state does it, it's just punishment for the act committed. Paragraph 5 is one that has stuck with me since the first time I read the book. For example, if someone wrongs, injures, or assaults another, and the latter retaliates in kind, this constitutes revenge and is blameworthy. If Peter kills the son of Paul, Paul has no right to kill the son of Peter. Were he to do so, he would be an act of aggression and blameworthy in the extreme. Rather, he must act in the opposite manner and show forgiveness, and if possible, even be of some assistance to the aggressor. This is alluded to in other places too. You can, more than forgiveness, do something positive in connection with that individual. I've been amazed at the number of times I've used this in firesides where it's been almost applauded. There's a universal agreement among the seekers in the firesides when I talk about this particular situation in terms of how right that is. In other words, that fits with people's natural understanding of how the law should work. Toward the end of the, well, first of all, it goes on to talk about the responsibility of the state or the government in terms of punishing, and the fact that this is not retribution. The body politic, as Abdul Baha phrased it, is not prompted by ill will in meting out the punishment. Then in the last 2 chapters, he goes in a different direction. Thus, when Christ said, "Whosoever shall smite thee on the right cheek, turn to him the left one," the purpose was to educate the people, not to imply that one should assist a wolf that has fallen upon the flock of sheep. In other words, here you get into the Peter and the son of Peter again. If someone else is being attacked, I have a perfect right to try to intervene to stop that attack, because that's not being done for any motive other than to stop the insurrection or whatever is going on. But here he says that when Christ says, "turn the other cheek," people have often wondered, what does that mean? And that's speaking to the individuals on the same level that Abdul Baha is here, is that you have no right for retribution, but you should forgive. But then in the same sentence, it goes on, switches to a different subject, and that is a wolf fallen upon a flock of sheep. There, you intervene. You keep the wolf at bay, however that may be. Just as forgiveness is one of the attributes of God's mercy, so is justice one of the attributes of his lordship. And here what we're talking about is a distinction about how each should be applied. Forgiveness is applied by the individual, but justice is the responsibility of the body politic. The canopy of existence rests upon the pole of justice and not of forgiveness. And the life of mankind depends on justice and not forgiveness. Thus, if a decree of amnesty were to be enacted, henceforth in all countries, the whole world would soon be thrown into utter disarray, and the foundations of human life would be shattered. That's a pretty big statement. So that's the responsibility of the body politic. Then he goes on to explain how some bloodthirsty people are like wolves and they kill just for the fun of it. And there have been many instances. War oftentimes brings out this thing where people will kill just for the fun of it. I heard that in Italy after the Second World War, some Italians were scrounging through garbage pits, and some American soldiers played a kind of game of sniping at these Italians that were going through the garbage dumps for their own survival. Whether or not it's true, I don't know, but it does show how war does erode the morality of people and oftentimes continues after the soldiers leave the front. Paragraph 10, in sum, the proper functioning of the body politic depends on justice and not forgiveness. For the individual, proper functioning depends on forgiveness and not on retribution or justice. It's a fascinating distinction. Here again, we have the words of Christ. Abdu'l-Baha liked to refer to Christ in this section. The words of Christ refer to private transactions between two individuals, stating that if the one person assaults another, the injured party should forgive, but the body politic must safeguard the rights of man. And I don't think anyone would say that the criminal justice system in any country is working at a high degree of effectiveness. And paragraph 16, here it gets to the thing I was talking about earlier, where it says that if it the body politic should instead strive night and day, lending every effort to ensure that souls are properly educated and that they progress day by day. They advance in science and learning that they acquire praiseworthy virtues and laudable manners. In other words, making the so-called punishment an educational opportunity is highly praiseworthy, according to Abdu'l-Baha, and extremely effective in terms of reduced recidivism, in terms of what we see in the country, in the world today. Any other comments or questions about chapter 77?
Well, there is a comment from Jamie, and she asks, does Abdu'l-Baha talk about when the community is the oppressor and will never punish themselves, even when they know they commit crimes upon certain groups of people? Before I have you respond to that, John, definitely oppression is a theme within the Baha'i writings, and Shoghi Effendi in The Advent of Divine Justice and Abdu'l-Baha in Some Answered Questions, just in chapter 74 on good and evil. Not only does he talk about that, but also Baha'u'llah and tablets of Baha'u'llah. And there is a source, and I just have to go grab my book, but I can get that for you. But John, I'm going to give it to you while I go do that, because there is a beautiful saying that Baha'u'llah has.
Great. I'd appreciate it if you could find that. When I don't know exactly what you're referring to there, if that's a situation where the well, the state has been responsible for many imprisonments which were unjustified, and generally speaking, the only method that has been found so far, when there is any kind of recompense, is to take taxpayer dollars and give them to the person who has been imprisoned for X number of years unjustifiably, and take taxpayer dollars and send him on his way. But I'm not aware of any specific things talking about how to bring censure to the well, it does strike me that as Baha'is we have a defense, in that if a spiritual assembly does something very wrong, makes a big mistake, we do have the Universal House of Justice to watch over things. And this is an enormous protection. Okay, I'd like to hear from others on this, though. Anyone?
Okay, well, while somebody comes on, so that the thing from Tablets of Baha'u'llah, because I was recollecting it, it had to do more with good and evil. And that's page 57, if you wanted to see what Baha'u'llah also says about what his son said and some answered questions. But there is a paper, and I'm hoping Tina could maybe find the source for you, but it's from Marie Gervais, Gervais. And if you can just maybe Google that for me, Tina, and say oppression. And then it's going to be, of course, Baha'i-library. And then that's going to be your source. Beautiful. Jay, please. Please unmute yourself.
The question was about an example of how the government institutions have done the wrong, and we've just heard a lot about Tulsa, where racism, where the government has been a partner in the racist problem. So they were on the wrong side of justice.
Yeah, history is filled with instances where the government's on the wrong side of good. And of course, now in the air is the 100th anniversary of Tulsa, which government was not necessarily responsible, but was complicit by its silence. It permitted it to happen and did nothing to seek the wrongdoers. In fact, if you want to look at our history from that standpoint, we've done a lot of good things. We've done a lot of things which are not too good too. And it's a fascinating thing how government can be on the side of good or evil and is rarely brought to answer for its decisions. Other comments or questions?
Yeah, Kathleen, please.
Yes. Do you believe that every wrong will right itself eventually? Just like this Tulsa massacre. it's getting recognition now. Look at all the years in the history books that we've all been raised with. It never mentioned any of these massacres and injustices of Black history. But now time has passed and it's coming to light, hopefully to help heal. But is that a saying that you put some credence in, is every wrong will right itself eventually? Or is that just my wish?
Oh, it's the wish of all of us, but I don't see the evidence. I sure wish it was true. In some instances, it is, but there are so many things where it's impossible for that to be righted. For instance, someone who takes someone's life, and 100 years later, nobody even remembers the name of either person. How is that going to be righted? Is Daniel getting a little cranky?
Yeah, he is. Okay, Gloria, please. Oh, please unmute yourself, dear.
I was just going to say that with getting ready for Abdu'l-Baha's centenary and studying the history of the faith and realizing, like this Tulsa factor that's been on TV, all of it is to analyze it and study on it. It can be so frustrating. It can take you right down, you know, spiritually. But I think that it's history that hopefully the good that the Baha'is can project and kindness, that we will eventually change the history. But I don't know how long it will take, and I don't know right from wrong, but I have to have faith that it will get better.
Well, I think this is true of any institution, that institution which can own up to its own dark segments is much more likely to survive. And including within the Baha'i faith, there have been some pretty dark incidents that have happened. But the fact that we can own up to them and acknowledge them and take them for what they are gives us an opportunity to learn from them.
Yeah, and you mentioned Abdu'l-Baha. I mean, he must just be really like beyond, because this is what he wants to see. He wants everything that he asked for when he came here 100 years ago. Sure, it's taking some time, but it's all going in that path. Kathleen, please. Okay, when you raise your hand, make sure you lower it again. Okay, never mind that.
You have to touch it again? Is that what you do? You have to touch it again? How do you lower it?
Yeah, I'll do it for you. Anybody?
Okay.
Who's next?
I think we're all set, John.
Okay.
Yeah, John, thank you so much. This was incredible. Oh wait, here we have something in the chat. Yeah. Actually, Evalie, can you read that?
That's good.
Evalie, could you read it? Or could someone read it on her behalf, please?
It's tough this time of morning. No, when I'd learned of the faith in Northern Arizona University and became a Baha'i there, and was associated a lot with the Navajos and on the Navajo reservation quite a lot. And of course, that was the time of the Vietnam War. And the young men coming back from the army and from serving in the war, the medicine men in the community would have a ceremony, a cleansing ceremony to help that individual come back into society. It seemed like such a good idea.
That's great.
that
I think we do too much for the wrong things and too much celebration for the wrong things and not enough celebration for the good things. And the best way to honor our returning warriors is to have some sort of a healing circle, because they've gone through hell many times. And that doesn't get off the plane, well, that doesn't stay on the plane when they get off. That stays with them, and they need an opportunity to process it. And another thing that I am fanatic about is when our Baha'i kids reach 15. I think the only thing that is unacceptable is to ignore it. There has to be some sort of a celebration for it. I do a little thing where I give them a piece of paper that shows all the things from the Akdas that now applies to them as 15-year-olds. And then I give them something that I don't want them to use for a long time. And that's a burial ring, because after 50, you're going to use the burial ring. And I say, keep this just as a reminder of now you are a Baha'i with full responsibility, but don't use it for a long, long time. But whether or not that's a good idea is beside the point. There's a lot of good ideas, but unless they're applied, they're worthless. And I think kids reaching 15 need the additional support of the entire community at that point in their life.